Good afternoon, Mr. Prime Minister. What are your first thoughts on the budget just presented by the Finance Minister, given the trying circumstances, economic circumstances, both global and domestic, that we are in?
Given the challenges facing our economy, the Finance Minister has done a commendable job. India needs to create jobs for our growing labor force to the extent of about 10 million persons every year. To do that, we need to accelerate the tempo of our growth. We need, as the 12th five-year plan has mentioned eloquently, a growth rate of about 8%. This is a growth rate which is consistent with our underlying potential. We have to get there. Although this is a difficult journey, it cannot be accomplished in a single year. But the Finance Minister has taken important steps to reverse the pessimistic mood with regard to investment climate, with regard to the growth potential and possibilities of our economy.
So you're right. In the last 6 months, there is a perceptible change in the investment climate. So to continue this momentum, so what reforms are you looking at, your government is looking at in the 6 months ahead, since the next 6 months are very critical?
Well, the Finance Minister has laid out the roadmap. There is plenty of food for every ministry to chew there. And each one of our ministries have to ask themselves this question: if India needs an 8% growth rate, growth which is at the same time inclusive and sustainable, what is it that each ministry should do? The Finance Minister has, I think, mentioned these challenges. It is up to the collective wisdom of my Council of Ministers to convert these challenges into opportunities, to accelerate the tempo of growth, to make it more inclusive, to make it more sustainable.
So the big question that arises is whether your government will get adequate support from the opposition in Parliament to drive some of the big reforms, legislative reforms. Now, there seems to be a perceptible change in the attitude of the opposition too. But a question that business community often raises is the bureaucracy on board? Are projects being cleared? Because mere clearance of a lot of projects would actually lift GDP by a good 0.5 to 1%.
Well, there have been problems with regard to clearances with regard to environmental clearances with regard to forest clearances, land acquisition problems. Many of these areas are the responsibility of the state government.
Yeah.
Whatever is within the realm of possibilities of the central government's action point, we have committed ourselves that we will use the mechanism of the Cabinet Committee on Investment to grapple with these tensions which exist in our system, and to ensure that roadblocks, whether they are environmental clearances roadblocks or forest clearances or other roadblocks, they are dealt with, and so that these roadblocks can be cleared and removed.
So, sir, you are confident that a positive climate is there for clearances to happen, for bureaucracy to be on board, and the Finance Minister himself said in Parliament that that some of the big projects which are pending, especially in the energy sector, will be cleared.
Well, I think he is speaking on behalf of the Cabinet, and I am pretty certain that the mood of the country is that this country must not lose any time. It must get its act together to accelerate the tempo of economic growth, sustainable growth, equitable growth. And I do believe that if the general mood of the country is right, it will infect the bureaucracy, it will infect the opposition, and in this task there are no winners or no losers. if India succeeds in getting to a growth path of 8% or more, I think the winners will be the people of India.
Sure.
The winners will be our young men and young women who need desperately new productive job opportunities.
So we either win together or lose together. So
That's true.
So how much are you worried about some of the structural distortions that have crept into the economy, the current account deficit, the dependence on foreign portfolio investments, particularly to fill the gap, and the structural heightening of inflation?
Well,
how much do these two worry?
There are today three types of barriers which can affect the realization of the growth potential.
Yeah.
One is the fiscal deficit.
Sure.
The finance minister has charted a path to bring the fiscal deficit under control. And if we succeeded in that quest, I think we would have created a better climate for investment. We would have created a better climate also for more moderate levels of inflation than we have had in the last 2 years. The second problem is that inflation has gone out of hand.
Yeah, you've always said it's the biggest tax on the poor.
That's right, and therefore, if fiscal deficit is brought under control, it would also, I think, enable us to moderate the pace of inflation also. The third is the current account deficit. The current account deficit we cannot reduce in one go. As the finance minister mentioned, we have a current account deficit of about $75 billion. In the short run, it has to be financed. In the medium term, it must be reduced. We must reduce our dependence on imports of oil, of coal, of gold, of petroleum products. And this is a medium-term objective, and it can be achieved partly by reducing unwanted imports, partly by boosting the country's export effort. So a multi-pronged strategy has to be in place to achieve credible answers to all these three problems. That is, tackling the fiscal deficit, tackling the inflation problem, tackling the current account deficit.
And so what, in your view, is a safe current account deficit that we should have?
I think, in my view, 2.5 to 3% of GDP is a safe level of current account deficit.
And sir, what do you see the GDP growth as in the coming fiscal?
Well, the finance minister has mentioned, and yesterday's economic survey also hints that it is realistic to assume a growth rate of about 6.2 to 6.7%.
Yeah.
And that in 3 years' time, if we work hard, if the world economy also, I think, improves, we should get back to the 8% growth path in 2 to 3 years' time.
Thank you, Mr. Prime Minister, for talking to us.
Thank you very much, Mr. Venu.